Good morning, everyone. My name is Ashley Shelton, and I'm the president and CEO of the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. We are so excited to have you here today to look at our work over the last year and really celebrate the wins and the hard work that we know community can do when community comes together to fight for their voice, their vote, and their power. This annual report session that we are getting ready to do with my good friends, and let me name all of our panelists. We have joining us today, Norris Henderson, who is the founder and executive director of VOTE, Voice of the Experienced, who will be joining us to talk a little bit about the criminal justice work that they're leading and that we support. We'll also have Susanna Berger, who's the regional program director for Made to Save, to talk about the vaccine equity work that we've been able to do this year. We have Rashida Ozan, founder of the Vessel Project, and she's an environmental justice and disaster response partner, and she is also one of our She Leads fellows this year, and so always glad to see how our worlds intersect. And then we also will be joined by Jared Evans, who is policy counsel for the NAACP LDF, Legal Defense Fund, who has been our close friend and partner on redistricting, and as that work continues. And so we will begin, and I will give a quick overview and then begin to invite our panelists in for discussion. And so with that, could you please, Taylor, give us the first slide? So this is our timeline for 2021. So the Power Coalition's annual report this year just reflects all of the hard work that has been done by hundreds of volunteers, thousands of voters, our staff, our team, and our partners. We are really proud of what we were able to accomplish in 2021. And as you look at the timeline, you'll see that as many of us felt and had to shift our work, the pandemic was still, in one of its many surges. And so, but again, the work goes on, the calendar moves on. And so we started in March with the municipal primary, a special congressional primary election because Cedric Richmond went to work for President Biden. We then began a full-fledged vaccine program where we were talking about Bring Back Louisiana and working with the state on their Bring Back Louisiana campaign and working to ensure that folks across our state were vaccinated, and in particular communities of color. And so we spent a lot of time knocking doors, talking to folks, dispelling myths, and giving them access to healthcare professionals to be able to answer and support their questions and support them in actually accessing the vaccine. April, we had a special congressional general election. It amazes me how many elections we have in Louisiana, and I'm proud to say that Janae Jameson, our director of programs, is working tirelessly to try to see if we can't streamline our elections through the legislative process this year. But that election resulted in Congressman Troy Carter being elected to finish up the term of former Congressman Cedric Richmond. And then through April 10th through June 12th, we had the regular legislative session of Louisiana. And in that regular legislative session, there were several wins. We're going to talk more about it. I won't get into it because our great panelists today will join us in kind of going deeper into some of those pieces. And then we also had a special election for the 7th Senatorial District because once Troy, who was currently a sitting senator, Troy Carter became our congressman, that left his seat open. And that election resulted in his nephew, actually, Senator Gary Carter, being elected to take that seat. Of course, we all remember Hurricane Ida and its impacts across our state, and in particular throughout communities in South Louisiana. And then we came out with a roadmap to recovery, which in September, which was a way for us to begin the important conversations that were going to have to be had about ARPA dollars and I'm sorry, let me stop speaking in code, but the American Rescue Plan dollars that President Biden sent to states throughout this country to help our communities recover. And one of the things that we understand from disaster recovery is that it is rarely that we focus on centering people and community, and that in this process with these particular dollars, that we wanted to make sure that there was a roadmap that looked at the intersectionality of all of the issues, whether it be housing, food insecurity, criminalization, any number of things, but also too, how do we actually get those dollars to the ground and not just use them to fill holes in budgets, but to actually make sure that people were made whole on the other side, of whatever the latest surge of the pandemic was at that moment. We then, moved on to our redistricting roadshows in October, and we went around the state with the House and Senate governmental affairs communities, engaging, over 1,000 residents across our state to have their voices heard in that process and to build out a record. And then we go back yet again to elections in the fall. And so we had an open primary for Orleans municipal elections, but we also had 5 constitutional amendments that were on that ballot that were statewide. And so, it's really difficult to get folks to appreciate that the entire state has to come out to vote for one set of things when there's nothing else on the ballot. And so it was really important to try to get our communities to turn out and have their voices heard in that. And then, of course, ended the year with all of those, the outcome of all of those elections and those runoffs. That is a very, very nice way of saying, talking about a whole lot of work that I want to get into. And so with that, I am excited to kind of move into elections and GOTV specifically. And so, and you can skip this slide because I'll do a quick run view, actually, Taylor. Let me just, I said a lot of what was in these highlights, but I will go through them quickly. So, Louisiana Power Coalition, we did GOTV campaigns for all 5 elections in Louisiana in 2021, 5 elections. And so that is considerable and a heavy lift. And I'm so proud of our team for always meeting the challenge and for our partners for supporting us in meeting those challenges. We jumped into action after Hurricane Ida. We put we put $150,000 onto the ground immediately in direct cash assistance, and then made another additional more than $300,000 worth of grants to community organizations that were still struggling following the storm. We worked with FEMA to try to engage across their processes to understand how folks could better connect and get the support that they needed. We worked with the governor's office to move the election because the way that Hurricane Ida hit, it was going to push us into impacting this election. And so when polling locations are out and the grid is out, and many of those polling locations being damaged, we knew that you couldn't ask people to turn out given those circumstances. And also too, when their families were still at that time scrambling to understand what they could possibly do to put their families back together. And so we were able to successfully move that. We also, again, had lots of legislative wins that I'm really proud of. When the rest of the country was going the other way on voting rights, we actually in Louisiana went in the right direction. And so Act 22 extends the amount of time you have in the voting booth. And so we used to have this arcane rule where you could only be in the voting booth for 3 minutes. And unfortunately, we couldn't get them to just drop the rule altogether, but we did double the time. And so now, every resident has 6 minutes in the voting booth. Act 365 extends early voting for presidential elections. We saw the unprecedented turnout for the presidential elections, people standing in line, people feigning in line. And we know too that 50% of all Black voters early voted in that particular election. And so this win is huge because it provides for additional days and additional time for folks to be able to access their vote through the early voting process. We did over 50 COVID-19 events across the state for Bring Back Louisiana, as well as with our partners at Made to Save. And with our Black church partners as well across the state. We're very proud to say, one of the things that we're really proud of is that even though the number of vaccinated folks in our state it's still not where we want it to be. Louisiana was the first state to reach a vaccination rate of the highest, African-American population against COVID-19. And so that's significant. When it first started ravaging our communities, 70% of the deaths from COVID were African-American. And so it was really important to us to engage the African-American and other communities of color to ensure that they were taking the precautions of this life-saving vaccine. And so to have been one of the first states to reach the largest amount of African-Americans and having them vaccinated is something that we're very proud of. 14 new She Leads Civic Engagement Fellows with, like I said, Rochetta being one of them. And so always happy to be here with our family. And then, and it says over 500 people trained in equitable redistricting principles. So that's just through our crowd academies. And then through the roadshow, we know that number was over 1,000 people specifically within the roadshow, piece. And then we did a lot of work around those constitutional amendments, many of which, all of which were problematic for communities and people throughout our state. And then Louisiana voters voted them all down except for one, which was Amendment 2, which unfortunately the language was very misleading and did not fully tell voters what all was what all was encompassed within this legislation and what all it would do. And so folks thought it was a tax cut, but it was actually a tax swap. But again, even then, we still had a number of Louisianans who cast their vote. And we narrowly, or not narrowly, but we almost, we still got the message through and voters still did the right thing. Unfortunately, again, the messaging on having a tax cut is hard to beat, but we will continue to do our jobs and continue to work with our partners like the Louisiana Budget Project and so many others that stood with us. Next slide. Get out to vote. And so I'm so excited because I'll get to talk about this with my good friend Norris Henderson. In 2021, between a presidential election and a midterm election, Louisiana had, of course, as I've said, these 5 elections, 5 rounds. Our impacts, over 925,000 texts sent, over 138,000 call attempts, 56,000 doors knocked, 10 candidate forums hosted over the course of those 5 elections, and over 2 million digital ad impressions. And so we're really proud of this work. One thing that I will note is that if you look at our work over time, our ability to contact and reach voters of color across our state continues to grow and deepen. And so I'm really proud, of how those numbers, have been able to grow and have impact in terms of voters being able to have their voices and their power heard in these elections. In 2021, there were a number of historic wins at the ballot box. Louisiana, again, we rejected Amendment 1, which we did a lot of work to educate voters on, and to keep local taxes locally controlled, or actually not local taxes, but to keep tax revenue locally controlled. New Orleans elected its first Black woman sheriff, a campaign championed by our Partners Vote and OPPRC, and voters continued showing up for the local elections as well. And so I'm going to pass it over to Norris Henderson, who is one of Power Coalition's founders and an anchoring partner at the Power Coalition table, and one of my dear friends, to talk a little bit about the sheriff's race and the win there. Norris?
Yes, thanks, Ashley. One of I think the most significant thing about the sheriff race was that we had several candidate forums in which the sheriff refused to attend. And I think that really kind of like set the tempo of what this election was going to be like. And I guess for the most part, the guy's been in office 17 years, and I think he just discounted everybody else in the race. It was kind of a full field. It was 4 other candidates in the race, and none of them had really name recognition in comparison to him. And so I think this thing started off in a sense whereas, he was like, okay, easy peasy, lemon squeezy, that he was just going to walk over everybody. And so what he didn't realize is that we had been for the last, I would venture to say the last 15 years, trying to find the apropos candidate to run for that office. And Susan Hudson became that candidate for the community. And so we kind of like campaigns started off slow. It was primarily because folks didn't really know who Susan was. So I think during the primary, our greatest job was just trying to apples to apples and oranges to oranges, kind of like tell people who Susan was or what she intended to do. At the time, Susan was the former independent police monitor who had been in that position for 11 years. That position was actually created in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina because of the police department's abuse of community. And so she was at the helm of that organization for 11 years. And some folks coaxed her into running for this office. Kind of like fast forward, we kind of like done a lot of outreach in the community. Ashley kind of like drew up all the numbers of all the outreach and contact we were doing. But during the primary, we finished in second place. And our second place finish, although we were 13 points behind. And so we just figured that maybe the other candidates in the race were kind of like, because this was more of a anti-government campaign, more so than it was anything else. And I think for the most part, even some of the other candidates kind of like misread that because the candidates who finished third and fourth actually gave their support to the sheriff. And the thing is, I think I just assumed that he figured because he had finished with 48% of the vote in the primary, and he just figured, well, this is going to be a walkover. But unbeknownst to him, and this is the real tragic thing about a lot of these races, is that these people are so far removed from what the want, needs, and desires of our community are that it almost makes it easy for us to kind of like go after them. And so he was resting on his 48%, and he got the endorsement from the third place and fourth place finishers. And I guess he thought that was it. And so that's really when the work actually started. We had shifted from our C3 work to our C4 work. So we can be more specific. We had, I want to say 40 billboards that we had during first portion of the billboards were just to educate people about who Susan was, what the office of sheriff responsibility actually were. And then by the time we got ready for the general election, we shifted gears to our C4 and those billboards, bus stop ads, we had a bus wrapped, just started talking about who this other person was, who the sheriff was. And it garnered a lot of attention. We actually had a television ad during one of the Saints football games. Matter of fact, the Saints Tampa Bay game, we had an ad that ran about the sheriff's office. And we just kind of just put in a lot of work. Come the general election, I think it was the election of the century, I'll put it that way, because it became the most talked about race pretty much in the history of this city, because we had a 17-year incumbent who actually got blew out. He didn't just get beat, he got blew out. He got a beat down in the election. And folks were saying, well, it wasn't really an upset because he should have seen it coming. And it's primarily because over the years, the jail under his management has been really criticized by everybody. The jail is currently under federal consent decree because of not only the conditions, but the fact that over 20-something people have died in the jail under his watch. And so it made it easier for us to get engaged. And one of the things about our mindset is that even during the primary, when we actually came in second, it was that, convincing our folks there's nothing wrong with losing the battle as long as we win the war. And so, came the December election, we actually regrouped and we made a good showing. So we actually, like Ashley has the first African-American female sheriff in the history of this state, the second woman in the history of this state. But this Louisiana is funny, especially New Orleans, because Susan is not a native New Orleanian, although she went to school at Tulane, got a law degree. But folks play the carpetbagger mentality, that anybody that's here that's not born and bred or not a charity hospital baby, they paint them as outsiders or carpetbaggers. And all of that actually just backfired on them. I mean, even the attack ads that they ran against the candidate, even ran against some of us, in reference trying to curtail our efforts to bring about change. So no, I'm really excited that I can't wait till May the 2nd till Susan gets sworn in and to actually see the beginning of something special. And I think the biggest thing more than anything else, that election sent the message that anything is possible, that anything is possible, that just because a person has been an incumbent don't really mean anything if you campaign right and if you actually tell the story, the Paul Harvey version of the story, just the rest of the story about what these positions entail and who would best fulfill that role for our community. And so I think the community, a lot of folks want to give, a handful of people credit for this, but this was an overall community effort. I mean, from start to finish, from the work that OPPRC had been putting in since 2004, from the work that our organization has put in since 2004, and then folks actually understanding what this role is and what this meant to break this stranglehold on our community. And so I am, like I said, again, just excited that May the 2nd is right around the corner and we will truly have a new sheriff in town.
I love it. I love it. And I think, one of the things that, Norris always talks about and has taught all of us in this work is that, if you are not talking to directly impacted people and you are not finding policy solutions that come directly from those people that are being most impacted by the systems that are harming them, then you cannot win. And I think that, this sheriff's race is a powerful example of what can happen when you educate voters about all of the options that they have in terms of understanding what the office is, and then understanding how much power that office holds and that person that will be holding that office holds. And then certainly, what is the change that they want to see? And I think that they heavily underestimated how many people's lives have been touched by the local jail in very hurtful and painful ways. As Norris noted, many deaths and other human rights violations. And I think that, I sit in awe of the ways in which, this win builds upon the win of the progressive DA, right? And this win build, and even though these are wins, I mean, we also still do the work of accountability as well. And so always proud to stand with Norris and his team, shoulder to shoulder to fight these fights and, and ensure that we move the needle for those that are hurting the most by these broken systems. And so, Norris, thank you so much for all that you do. Many of you, some of you may know, but if you don't, we have the privilege of sharing space right on Washington Avenue with the Vote staff, and it is a privilege and an honor. And that's how we can make sure that our work stays connected and that our work is moving in the same direction, because we understand the power and the intersectionality between, criminal justice reform, economic opportunity, and voting rights and voice, right? And so we've been able to have many historic wins. This certainly is one of them. And so, Nars, just again, always thank you. And look on to the next one. And I will say one thing that's super important about what Nars mentioned is that in Louisiana, with the exception of this last statewide race, and it was because of term limits that we had so much turnover, but other than that kind of 12-year mark, you will see that about 50% of the House and the Senate candidates go unchallenged. So 50% of the, of the 105 seats on the House side and the 39 seats on the Senate side, they walk back into office with not one challenger. And when you think about the hard work that we do to try to fight for equity and justice at the legislature, that's a hard pill to swallow, because it's typically that 50% that is not, helping us get this work done, changing our state for the better, moving us off the top of every bad list and bottom of every good list. And so this is an opportunity to continue to send that message that, incumbency is not promised, and that the voters in this state will continue to determine and decide who will lead them, and who will lead on the issues that they care about. And so I think that that's a really powerful message that was sent by this sheriff's race. And also too, as we gear up for statewide elections in 2023, we will not have 50% of the state and the state house and Senate go unchallenged. And especially following this redistricting session where, there was a big conversation about incumbency. And Jared and I will get into that later, but thank you, Norris. And I always appreciate your voice, your partnership, and your support. I'm going to move us forward into our vaccine equity work. And so in March of 2021, the Power Coalition joined the Bring Back Louisiana campaign that was led by the state. And we also had tremendous support from our partners at Made to Save to get communities vaccinated across the state of Louisiana. In particular, we were reaching out to Black and Brown communities that were not getting vaccinated at the same rate for a variety of different reasons. Our data team identified community members in low vaccination areas, and we reached out via text, phone. We mobilized our canvassing team to go into neighborhoods and speak with people about any questions that they may have, and really to just dispel the myths and to actually engage people in being able to engage and interact with healthcare professionals about what was the best thing that they could do in this particular, with this particular question about the COVID-19 vaccination. And so with that, our impact, 144,971 doors knocked, over 1 million social media impressions, over 70,000 texts sent and continuing to be sent, over 287,000 calls, and over 50 vaccine events across the state. And so with that, I'm so excited to bring on and introduce our partner, Susanna Berger, to kind of share with us from the perspective of our partner at Made to Save, how and in what this vaccine equity work has made a difference in our state. Susanna?
Thank you so much, Ashley. I am so incredibly excited to be here to get to lift up this incredible work that y'all have been doing over the last year to ensure that your community is protected against this pandemic. Like Ashley said, my name is Susanna. I am a regional program director with Made to Save, and we are a national grassroots mobilization effort focused on building trust in and increasing equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines in communities of color who we know have been hit hardest across the board in every way that matters by the COVID-19 pandemic across this country and really across the globe. And we do that not just by providing grants to incredible community groups like Power Coalition, but also working hand in hand throughout the course of those grants to ensure that we're able to support this work by helping you guys increase your capacity and scale up and scale out this powerful and inspiring and essential work to combat this pandemic. And so I was lucky enough to start working with the Power Coalition team, primarily with Morgan Shannon and Dinesha Hugel in June of last year, meeting, every month, often multiple times a month, starting in June and continuing through our regrant in recognition of the incredible work and success that this effort has had in your communities from November through to just a few weeks ago, and really working to understand how we can support Power Coalition in meeting the community where they are and understanding the unique challenges and obstacles and barriers that your communities were facing to feel confident in getting the vaccine and also just to access the vaccine itself. And so we would meet regularly to talk through, challenges like what Ashley was saying, the pervasiveness and disinformation that was leading folks astray, acknowledging the lack of public health infrastructure in Black communities and how that required a really heavy lift by Power Coalition and your partners to find culturally competent and respectful and reliable providers to join those 50+ events that Ashley was lifting up. And, also recognizing that the years and years that Power Coalition has spent building relationships and earning the trust of the community uniquely positioned y'all as the right messenger and the trusted messenger to bring COVID-related information and bring vaccines to the community where it was needed most. And so, acknowledging generational trauma and very understandable distrust of the US medical system, and also how to overcome obstacles like transportation barriers, language barriers, the inability for a lot of folks to take time off during the week from 9 to 5 to go to a vaccine clinic. And so it was incredible to see the way that you guys identified those obstacles and those barriers and figured out how to address them by hosting vaccination clinics every single weekend at times that allowed folks to come on their own schedule and make it work for their own unique needs as a family. And making sure that you continue to offer information as vaccines were approved for younger age groups, getting information out about access to the free at-home test kits and how to make sure that you were able to order them, how multifamily households could access them when that was initially a barrier that covidtests.gov did not understand at the front end, how difficult that would be for communities of color, many of whom have a lot of more folks than 4 people living in a household. And so it has been incredibly inspiring to get to play a very, very small part in supporting the work that y'all have done since March and are going to continue to do as we face this pandemic, not just in New Orleans, which is where I'm based and where I've been lucky enough to get to work more closely with Morgan and Dinesha, but really across our beautiful state. And one of many things that I find so inspiring about Power Coalition's approach to this work is the way that y'all weave so much of your programming together, and you're not just doing one thing at a time. Every time you're knocking on doors and making sure folks have access to voting information, you're also giving vaccine related information. You're also letting people know where the closest vaccination event is going to be and making sure they know how to get there. And if they don't have a ride, helping them figure out how to access that. And, seeing that the vaccination events that you hosted were, again, not just providing vaccines and vaccine related information, but they were also community events with live music and food distribution and voter registration and mutual aid, especially after Ida. And, during the holidays, there was a toy giveaway while folks could also get their vaccine, and just really meeting the community where they are and focusing not just on difficulties, but also on creating joy. And, Morgan participated in this incredible panel that Made to Save hosted for Black History Month and spoke so inspirationally about how Power Coalition's approach is to focus on the holistic health and wellness of your community in the face of intersectional oppression, and really making sure that you're not just focusing on one piece, but working across the board to uplift and empower the community and really prioritize bringing in businesses, bringing in faith leaders, empowering college ambassadors at HBCUs in the area, and just really coming at it from every single perspective, every single avenue to affect change in such a profound and tangible and inspiring way. And like Ashley lifted up, being, a leader in ensuring that Louisiana was a leader in vaccination rates among communities of color, among Black communities. And I, have just felt incredibly privileged to get to work with all of you over the last year and get to see sort of from the inside out the way that this work is conceptualized and planned and put into action and really lifted up. And so I feel like I could go on for 20 minutes or more about this incredible work, but I know y'all have a lot of incredible information still yet to share on the work that you've done over the past year. But I just continue to be in awe of and so inspired by everything you do for the community, not just related to COVID, but the way you weave that into every single thing you do, every conversation you have.
Thank you so much, Susanna. That was so generous. And I think, one of the things that is, very important to Power Coalition and all of our partners is that we understand that, like, I can't talk to you about voting if I'm not understanding the ways in which you're hurting right now, the ways in which, the intersections of any number of different problems, whether it was food insecurity, housing insecurity, all of the things that were happening to people, in the I don't even want to say the aftermath, because I feel like, in this last surge, I will say, it's just been real. And we know that women of color disproportionately lost the most amount of jobs during COVID. And we know that the majority, and disproportionately again, were Black women. And so when we talk about this recovery and we talk about the American Rescue Plan dollars and all of these other things, we understand that we have to weave them together and that we've got to connect dots so that, so that we're consistently, showing up for community where they are. And I just want to give Made to Save a big shout out, because there were a couple of times during the last surge where there just wasn't enough people to actually give vaccines. Like, the weekends were packed. We weren't able to access all of the things that we needed, and Made to Save came through every single time. And so we are grateful that that when we needed folks to do vaccinations or to give educational information, you guys always came through for us, even when everyone else was maxed out. And so for that, we are really grateful. And then too, because of Made to Save and some other donors, we were able to, have at least 50 canvassers that stayed on our payroll for an entire year. And typically for Power Coalition and Vote and other partners, we kind of stand that infrastructure up during GOTV time, and then, it kind of, it decreases after that. And this was an opportunity for us to have folks on the payroll for an entire year, whether it was, vaccine work, GOTV work, or engaging community in general on any number of issues. It was a really powerful thing for Power Coalition to do, to be able to have that extended staff that we typically just stand up for a short period of time, to be involved all the time. And then I would be remiss if I didn't thank Vote, who allowed us to use the big multipurpose room time and to host these vaccination events. And then also to certainly the time of their staff. And there were so many other partners as well, but Vote always made sure we had a spot, and made sure that that if we needed it, we'd figure it out. And so thank you guys for that as well. I'm gonna move on to redistricting, and I'm not redistrict, I'm sorry, environmental justice. Skipping on my agenda here. So Power Coalition, environmental justice has always been a really critical part of our work. What is true is that, we have worked with the Bucket Brigade from, since our founding. And one of the things that, that folks would say in the EJ world is that, like, the fights are so intense in terms of, trying to, save their communities from, the terrible impacts of industry on their health and their communities, that it was hard for them to kind of sit at our table at a regular basis. And what I'm really excited about was that we found a way to, to make that work, right? Like to actually meet them where they were as organizations working on environmental justice, and really weaving it into how we understand how it intersects with all of the other issues that are held at our table. And so Power Coalition, in partnership with the Louisiana Bucket Brigade, we hold bi-weekly environmental justice calls to give grassroots environmental justice partners space to work together, share wins, discuss their needs, also benefit from different trainings, whether it be social media or adding or learning how to use different communication strategies to get their messages out. And so these meetings included 3 media trainings, one-to-one media expert sessions. In response to Hurricane Ida, Power Coalition and our partners quickly mobilized resources and used community connections to help people in communities become whole again. So again, we did that first week, which is really, a testament to so many things, because it used to be that we didn't even have the infrastructure to be able to push out money that quickly to different folks, because it would all be either us or, one of our partners having to get that money to the ground. But I'm really proud to say that there is a network of organizations that we were able to push out that initial kind of $200,000 in direct aid that first week, and then, or the first 2 weeks, because it was 150 that first week, and then within the next week we pushed out another 50, and then we've done over 300,000 and counting to continue to support those communities as they recover from Hurricane Ida. And then also too, we're still continuing to fight with FEMA to try to make people whole in the midst of this, because so many applications were denied, so many issues still confound communities as far back as Hurricane Delta and Hurricane Laura. And so, but really quickly, in addition to the resources, we did multiple rebuild-a-thons where we worked with community volunteers to muck and gut, to do roof repairs and other things to help families get back on their feet. We had over 140 volunteers, 700 meals distributed, 50 cleaning kits distributed, 55 homes mucked, gutted, or tarped. And I think that is just the beginning, right? We've also done some additional direct cash assistance on the backside of these storms to try to understand like what happens in a couple of months later, and folks are still reeling from these storms and trying to understand their needs. And so really proud to continue to work with them. And we are joined today by Roshetta, and I would love to have her join me and talk a little bit about the environmental justice cohort and the Vessel Project.
Good afternoon, everybody. Again, I'm Roshetta Ozan. I'm the founder of the Vessel Project of Louisiana. I'm also the clean energy organizer for Healthy Gulf for Southwest Louisiana and Southeast Texas. I started Vessel Project because so many things had happened in Southwest Louisiana, Hurricane Laura, Hurricane Delta, Winter Freeze, Uri, and the Great Flood in May. Started it on Valentine's Day, and initially it was just looking for people who didn't have adequate housing because so much had happened and I didn't want them to freeze to death. So just started walking the streets looking for people, trying to help them as best I could. And other people joined in where we had an election going on. I looked on the ballot and I started, contacting everybody who were elected officials. I don't live in Lake Charles. So I knew I wasn't going to vote in that race for mayor of Lake Charles, but I was trying to highlight that you all have an election going on and your citizens are sleeping in tents. You better pay very close attention to how, the people on the ballot are reacting to this. And so the then mayor, he's still the mayor, Nick Hunter, they didn't have a plan for the residents of Calcasieu Parish, specifically Lake Charles, during that freeze. And so I started paying for residents to, stay in hotels out of pocket, and other people joined in. Several candidates, several city council members, and all joined in. And I kept saying, these are your leaders. These are the people you're voting in. Pay attention to how they're reacting during these crises. And so anyway, we ended up helping with Bike into the Poll event with 337 Vote Project. And during the course of this, me starting Vessel Project and working with Healthy Gulf, I had heard the Power Coalition name a couple of times, but I wasn't really real familiar with them because again, I live in Southwest Louisiana. And so a couple of months pass, May gets here, we have this huge flood. So everybody who didn't lose everything during the 2 hurricanes or the freeze, they lost everything in the flood. So now we have thousands of residents without homes or without safe homes, safe drinking water. And I was just looking out for every resource to try to raise money and to help. And I saw that the Power Coalition had the She Leads fellow cohort for 2021 starting, and I applied, and of course I was accepted into the program. And immediately we were given funds, and with those funds and other organizations who donated funds, I was able to do a summer feeding program, and I fed the community every weekend the entire summer, because the schools fed the community Monday through Friday. And I was like, well, what are people supposed to eat on the weekends? They still don't have a house. They're still in tents. So every Saturday and Sunday, they had a full course meal and snacks for the kids, thanks to money from Power Coalition. And then, we move into August, and Hurricane Ida hits, and thanks to Power Coalition, again, the Vessel Project was able to give out $30,000 in direct funds to those who fled to Southwest Louisiana fleeing from Hurricane Ida. And so once we got those residents here, those evacuees here, mainly in Benton, Louisiana, they were in 2 different hotels. I fed them every day, full course meals, and supplied them with all of their hygiene products. I gave them $100 bills in their hands to get whatever else that they needed. And we provided baby supplies and adult diapers, just whatever their needs were, no questions asked. If you asked for it, we provided it immediately. And I say we, Vessel Project was originally 2 people. It's now just me. So we did all of that with the 2-man team. But thanks to me reaching out to Janae and the Power Coalition, they were able to connect me with other organizations who sent volunteers here to help us, because while everybody was fleeing Ida, Southwest Louisiana was getting ready to go back to school. And we know, that our kids hadn't had a regular school year because of COVID and the hurricanes. And so everybody had lost everything. And I was determined to make sure that these kids went back to school, as smoothly as possible, even though they were going to be going to schools that were still damaged because FEMA had not given us money to redo our schools. So we ended up having a huge back to school event where we provided over 500 kids with backpacks, brand new tennis shoes, name brand shoes, not Walmart's, even though I wear Walmart shoes. I've never worn a Jordan before. I had my personal children, my teenagers, to go with me to shop for shoes and clothes for the kids because I wanted them to feel, special and feel good about going back to school because they hadn't been to school in a regular setting in over a year. And that was thanks again to money from Power Coalition and other organizations. We gave out, all those kids had every school supply that was on their school supply list, from pre-K up to college students. We were able to administer vaccines. We had over 500 vaccines for all the people who came through. I think we ended up administering between 100 and 200 vaccines that day. We were able to get people registered to vote because we had a senator election coming up, I believe. So we had 337 Vote Project out there. We were able to get people to vote. But all of the way that I have structured my events after being a She Leads Fellow has been modeled after the way that Power Coalition does everything. They don't just tackle one thing at their events. They try to cover as many things as possible because, especially in these environmental justice communities like Lake Charles, Southwest Louisiana as a whole, surrounded by industry already, oil and gas, you would think that if oil and gas is so special, and if Louisiana continues to say yes to LNG exports, that we would be the #1 state. We have so many oil and gas industries, but yet we look like a third world country. Our children don't have textbooks, laptops, or whatever. So it's just so many issues that you have to try to tackle when you can get people to come out. And so we were able to give out for Christmas over 400 community members because I called it a community Christmas event, but I had several senior citizens who were contacting me like, you got anything for the senior citizens? And so I ended up giving every person who walked through the door, all the kids got a toy, adults received $100 bills, and everybody was fed. They all took pictures with Santa from 9 months to 99 years old. And all of that was thanks to the Power Coalition having a vision for She Leads Fellow and accepting me into the program from out here in Southwest Louisiana. And that's helped me to address so many issues. I mean, we still have a long way to go. And I hope that I can continue to partner with Power Coalition. Every time I speak to a group of them, even when I interviewed for She Leads, I was just so emotional because it's amazing to have so many women and so many people of color who are doing great things, equitable things, things that are needed, things that are just, things that are overlooked, because even though Susanna was saying earlier that there's so many disparities, but our main fight as African Americans and as the Black and brown community, is that we continuously have to prove how human we are. We hurt, we cry, we bleed, just like everybody else. But because of so much injustices towards us, it's hard for us to trust anything that looks too good to be true. And so to have an organization like this, full of people who look like us, that's saying, hey, go get the COVID vaccine, because we didn't trust it. I mean, you know, everybody was talking about the STD, that syphilis experiment. Like, no, if you didn't think people knew history when it was time for COVID, everybody was a history buff. Black people were not getting vaccinated. And you saw Black and brown people saying, go get the vaccine. You saw Black and brown people saying, go out and register to vote, go vote. You saw Black and brown people saying, make sure you fill out the census. And me sharing those messages, me having that connection to the Power Coalition, made all the world difference here in Southwest Louisiana. I didn't feel alone fighting this fight that I fight every day. It's storming outside now, so I might be talking really loud because I really don't know if you all can hear me well. My internet is acting crazy. But again, thank you all so much for that opportunity to be a She Leads Fellow. It's made a very big difference in Southwest Louisiana, this environmental justice community, and we are also a climate justice community, as you know, and it's a difference. We continue to say we will not be an environmental or climate sacrifice, and it's because of people like you and groups like you who continue to help us to fight, you know, against that. So thank y'all so much.
Thank you so much, Rashada. And I think, like there's so much work to still be done around, the climate and even recovering our communities on the other side of these disasters, and all of the conversations that, we have midterms coming up in the fall, and you're going to have an opportunity, in particular in Lake Charles. Your congressman is up for re-election. He missed many of the votes around you guys receiving aid in Lake Charles after the hurricane. He talks smack about it. That's the nicest way I could put it. So, you know what, if you feel compelled to be able to do something about that and elect somebody that has the interest of community, then, Power Coalition's here to work with you to do candidate forums and other things so that you can understand how to make the best choice. And again, I want to be able to just, thank all of our partners that worked with us on disaster relief. Norris and his team, we were providing ice to folks all along the bayou who didn't have, whose grid was out much longer and who were without drinking water for much longer than a lot of places in the state. And again, all of the supports that were provided for us to be able to move resources to those most in need. And again, that aid continues, and we will continue to support communities as we work through that. And so, thank you. I'm going to move us into redistricting, and so. We knew, from the formation of Power Coalition, that one of our top goals was we saw redistricting as the North Star. And so, we have completed and accomplished everything within our initial strategic plan and more, right? It's been unbelievable the ways in which we've been able to move the needle. But redistricting was the last piece of the puzzle. And, redistricting decides, who has power and who has voice. And so for us, it was really critical to be able to prioritize this and center this for the people of our state, in particular, people of color. In partnership with NAACP, Legal Defense Fund, the ACLU, and other partners across the state. Power Coalition worked on a redistricting educational campaign for hundreds across the state. We worked on crowd academies. We have 3 redistricting fellows across the state, Carlos Pollard Jr. in New Orleans. I'm looking at their faces and I'm literally blanking on all the rest of the names. I'm so sorry. Oh,
Carlton Jones and Lisa Tompkins.
Thank you.
Both in Baton Rouge, and Lisa Tompkins in Shreveport.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Morgan. I had some coffee, but not enough coffee. And so, but those redistricting fellows worked tirelessly across our communities. We also too did crowd academies in a regional partnership with one of our partners to be able to teach people what redistricting encompassed, how to draw maps, how to, engage in the process. And then again, I think, we haven't done the full count, but there were at least over 1,000 people engaged throughout the roadshow that then, commenced across the state. And so we have been providing materials, big shout out to Morgan Shannon on our staff who came up with these redistricting mini guides that really broke it down in very simple language for folks to be able to access and to take some of the, fear out of engaging in the process. And then also too, we provided financial resources. We did many grants, to organizations that wanted to engage in whether if that was resources for food, for, late evening meetings or childcare or whatever that was. We wanted to make sure that we could support them and being able to engage in this process. And then we also provided a lot of planning support. I mean, we still have a demographer on our team that is working with us, now that we've closed out the state process, that's working with us on local redistricting in a lot of different places across the state. And so for us, this was really about how do we resource this process as much as possible? And how do we make sure that communities are paying attention and having their voices heard? And so, just to kind of go through our impact, 5 redistricting crowd academies, 12 organizational mini grants, $44,000 re-granted, 300 people at the Capitol for our day of action and mobilization on those first 2 days of the redistricting special session. And, all of this work, was intense. I think that one of the things that I keep reflecting back to people was that there were 2 things that struck me through this process. One was, the amount of time that, times that folks had to share with me how hard this was and that I should have really low expectations for what was possible on behalf of the Black and brown people that live in our state, that as per the census, our state is Blacker and browner. And, and that this was just hard. And, and I had to keep reminding folks that, well, none of us picked easy jobs, whether you are, the president and CEO of the Power Coalition or the governor's general counsel or or an elected official at all levels of government. Like, none of us picked the easy job. We had to do our job and make sure that we prioritize the voices and the people of this state. And even though we didn't get all of the things that we wanted, through this process, and there were still some really powerful wins. And I'm glad that ultimately, the governor stood with us on vetoing the congressional map. And now we are hoping that the courts will draw that map. The second thing that really also resonated with me was that in addition to everybody telling us how hard everything was, even though we knew it was going to be hard. And so it kind of tickled me that it was a revelation apparently. But the second thing that really, kind of sat with me was we sat in the Capitol for, I don't even know how many weeks. I guess it was like 3+ weeks because it was shorter than, well, it was a day shorter than they said it would be. But it was February 1st through the 21st, I think, or 20th. And in that time that we sat in the Capitol, just the sheer impact of sitting in a room where elected leaders consistently denied the voices of the people of this state, people unapologetically throughout every listening session during the roadshow, they asked for an equitable and fair process. They asked for actual representation, and to have sat through that for that time and to listen to the racism, to listen to the disenfranchisement and all of the reasons that it was supposed to be okay that they were, even though the Black and brown population of our state increased, denying us voice. And so that is why I'm so glad to introduce our partner, Jared Evans with NAACP Legal Defense Fund, to talk a little bit more about the redistricting process, where we are and where we hope to be.
Thank you so much, Ashley. So, we've heard so many, people talk about, oh, y'all worked so hard over the past year. Y'all have done so much work in the past few months over redistricting. This was actually a process that began at the end of 2019. And so before I get there, I'm going to tell you what the end result is. The end result of all of this is that the legislature failed to pass a map, talking specifically about the congressional map, that fairly and accurately reflected Louisiana's diversity. So LDF and the ACLU, representing Power Coalition, has sued the state, challenging that map under the Constitution, under the Voting Rights Act, So as Ashley alluded to, we are hopeful that the court steps in and does the job that the legislature failed to do, which was drawing a map, as I said, that fairly and accurately represents the diversity of Louisiana. So you've heard others talk about the work in the 2019 election. And that was essentially when the redistricting work began. I distinctly remember a couple of weeks after the gubernatorial runoff in 2019, before Bayou Classic and Thanksgiving, being on a call with Ashley, everybody exhausted from the election, everybody just so tired from all the hard work we put in. But then she reminded everybody, and y'all know next year is a census year. So we immediately started planning and getting to work on how are we going to educate the public on the redistricting process, on the importance of the census. How are we going to explain how those numbers are directly used for redistricting, the power that the census holds in terms of where funding and resources are allocated. And so those discussions began at the end of 2019. Little did any of us know that we would be conducting the census and trying to encourage people to fill out the census in the middle of a global deadly pandemic that disproportionately affected Black people. In addition to that, the worst hurricane season that Louisiana had seen since 2005, when of course we had Hurricanes Katrina and Ida. So, you've heard again, so many people refer to all the challenges that happened during the pandemic, how it disproportionately affected not just the virus itself, but all of the other consequences in terms of unemployment and housing, all of the other struggles that disproportionately affected Black and brown people. And as all of that's going on, right, and as we're still trying to battle the hurricane and the recovery, we are still fighting and encouraging people to fill out the census. And one of the challenging things about the census and redistricting to the same extent is that you hear everyone knows what we say when we say please go out and vote, and the vaccine, right? These are all concepts and issues that people are familiar with. They hear them every year. You only hear about census and redistricting every 10 years. So for many people who were involved in this process, this was their first time ever hearing about redistricting, even knowing that they could play a part in it, even realizing that their voice mattered in terms of how their districts looked and the people who represented them. So once the census was over at the end of 2020, and after just so much struggle, after so much we had to overcome with the pandemic and the hurricanes, we get to 2021, and Power Coalition goes on presents the Crowd Academies to educate the public on the importance of redistricting and why it matters so much to your community. And again, for I would say 90% of people, the public, this is their first time ever hearing about redistricting, their first time ever being involved in the process. And very early on, in addition to us educating the public, we also had to educate our lawmakers because for many of them, because of term limits, there were only about 5 people in the entire House and Senate who had actually gone through redistricting before. So LDF and Power Coalition and ACLU spent a considerable amount of time educating members of the Black Caucus and other allies in the legislature who would be going through this process, who would be leading this effort in terms of redrawing our Bessie map, our state Supreme Court, the House and Senate maps, and obviously the congressional map. And so once the legislative committees released their schedule of where they were going to be having their road shows at, which is essentially when the committees of jurisdiction, which is the House and Governmental Affairs Committee and the Senate and Governmental Affairs Committee, they go to the 8 or 9, I think it's 7 major cities throughout the state to receive feedback from the public on how they want their maps to look. And our coalition, again, led by the ACLU, LDF, and Power Coalition, we didn't just turn it out to chance and tell people and encourage people to show up, right? We actually went out into the community in each of these cities, built relationships, and held a robust training the night before each one of these road shows happened, so that people not only would come to the hearing, but they would actually feel empowered and knowledgeable when they step to the microphone and actually testify. And there was a lot of work that went into all of that. And Power Coalition led They led our entire coalition when it came to finding venues to hold the trainings, when it came to finding food, because we couldn't just tell people to come. We fed them. Literally all LDF and ACLU had to do was show up and give the training on redistricting. Everything else was run by Power Coalition, and I just cannot express how much that meant to us as we were drawing maps and going back and forth with members and going back and forth with internally on what kind of how we were going to organize ourselves. Power Coalition just totally led that entire process and getting those and getting the robust turnout at both the trainings and the actual hearings themselves. Power Coalition was at every single hearing. I think the only organization that had a showing and had someone testify at all 7 stops across the state, and that representation really meant a lot. And so we kept hearing from lawmakers and other leaders, oh, it's a really good turnout here at this hearing. Yeah, that's a lot of people came and showed out, and we said, well, you're welcome. Like this was not a coincidence. This was not something random that happened. This was because we went out into the community, we did the work, we made the relationships, and we turned people out and educated them and empowered them so that they would feel comfortable and that they would know what they were talking about when they came and testified. And some of the most moving and impactful testimony from the entire 2020's redistricting series cycle was from community members that Power Coalition, LDF, and ACLU had educated throughout the process. When people actually came to the microphone the following night and they told their story, they told how important it was for them to have maps in their community that accurately and fairly represent them. And so all of that is even before, all of that work is before we even get to the redistricting session, right? So we've educated the public on the census, we've encouraged them to fill out the census. Then we have the redistricting crowd academies. We do a huge campaign on public education on redistricting. 2021, then we get to the actual roadshow hearings. We have our own trainings for the roadshow. All of that leads us up to the actual conference that Power Coalition held right on the eve of the actual redistricting session where the maps were drawn. I've been a practicing attorney for about 12 years now, and I can tell you that the conference that Power Coalition put on was one of the most well organized and impactful that I've ever had the privilege of speaking at, in terms of really giving the people who attended tangible talking points, issues that they actually could comprehend and that they could actually take to the microphone when they testified the following 2 days at the actual at the Capitol. And it was so robust. I can't even, I think we were all blown away at the turnout, but also exactly how organized it was, that so many people from across the state, from every single city came to Baton Rouge, not just to testify, but to actually go look their lawmaker in their face, go look their representative and their senator in their face and tell them how important it was for them to have maps that fairly and accurately represent them. I can't talk about this without bringing up the college students that Carlos organized, their testimony, the way they conducted themselves, I think blew even away some of the most conservative Republican members of the legislature, right? I think even they were impressed at how organized they all were, how they were so on message, and how they came to the message, how they came to the table, just so knowledgeable on redistricting and how the map should look. So that again, all of that is even before the redistricting session has started, right? All of that is like laying the foundation. And then once the actual redistricting session started, Power Coalition was at the table with LDF and ACLU in the room with us every single day as we advocated, as we pushed and fought for fair maps on every single level, right? There was someone from Power Coalition that testified on the Supreme Court, on Bessie, on the House and Senate, and the congressional maps. We stood shoulder to shoulder with them all 20 something days of that redistricting session, which was probably some of the most trying, stressful, aggravating, frustrating, and just long days that, that I've had in my career. I think Ashley just summed it up so powerfully, is that we weren't asking for, we were just essentially just asking for fair representation, right? That's all we wanted, was maps that fairly and accurately represented the diversity of Louisiana. And to day after day after day to hear all of what the public had asked for, all the public testimony that began in October, to hear it just so soundly rejected day after day by the leadership of the legislature, and that is reflected in the map they passed, was very, very deflating. But that's what we have the judiciary for. That's why we have now sued, as I said, and it's in the hands of the courts now.
No, thank you so much for that, Jared. And I think, there were just so many moments in this process. And I think, one thing that I encourage, folks to do is that, like the work still continues, right? Like we, like the governor did, and, he did veto the congressional map. He what they call a pocket veto. He did not sign the state house and Senate maps, but they went into law regardless, right? Even without his signature. And so the work still continues. We've got to uphold this governor's veto of the congressional map. We are in court, and but in terms of this, what our state constitution says, our legislators still have the right to respond, and so we need to make sure that we are continuing to apply pressure, that they allow the courts to redraw this map, because it is highly unlikely that the legislature will come to any agreement, as they could not through the session. And I think it's also striking to me that this legislative body, they literally put forth a lease change map at the state level in every way. And then worse than the lease change map, they actually destroyed an existing minority House seat. And so, like the idea that we, find ourselves in this place where, we have, our state is Blacker and browner, we lost 5% white population, and somehow we have less representation through this redistricting process. And so, we will continue to fight. I'd be remiss if I didn't also lift up Devontae Lewis, who was adjunct staff pretty much for Power Coalition throughout this process. He was amazing. He had intel, he had key relationships that made this process a little bit easier. And so Devontae with the Louisiana Budget Project, SPLC, E Pluribus Unum, and so many others that were part of our kitchen cabinet that thought with us about this every single week and used their relationships and their resources to help us, fight this fight and continue to fight this fight. And so we are so grateful to our very own Janae Jameson, who powerfully testified on every single map, and and made sure that the record was robust, and that the record reflected the fact that this state has asked for and continues to ask for an equitable and just process. And so wanted to make sure that I thanked our team. We are now in local redistricting. And so we know the fight is ensuing in East Baton Rouge Parish School Boards. We know that the New Orleans City Council is, trying to wrap up a process. And I want to give a shout out to Carlos Pollard Jr. on our team, because he has been working with some of the city council members to make sure we open that process up a little bit more, so that more community can have their voices heard. Our partner Vote has drawn a map that has 2 additional districts. And so there's a lot happening. And so you got to stay engaged. And so even though we're in the midst of, the next step in the state redistricting process, we still need your voices in all of these local processes where, we're working with Evangeline Parish and Ville Platte, trying to help with their school board process. We do have many grants that are still available. We do have a demographer that can provide some support. And so please reach out at powercoalition.org or email us at info@powercoalition.org, and we'll be happy to connect and provide whatever support that we can. And so we are.
And Ashley, you just quickly mentioned, you just zoomed right over the fact that the governor vetoed the maps. You didn't mention how much work actually went into that, right? We had, was it 14 days to get a veto, Ashley?
Yes.
Something like that, from the moment when the legislature passed the maps until the deadline for the governor to veto the maps. And it was, as exhausted as we were, from the redistricting session, it was an absolute sprint. I mean, phone calls until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, phone calls at 3, very early in the morning to make sure the governor felt the pressure of the community, that he felt the pressure of the public to veto these maps. And that entire campaign was led by Ashley and Power Coalition. We had so many conversations on strategy, on our best messengers in the community who we needed to be talking to. I can't even think of how many pastors Ashley talked to in the past month, trying to make sure that the governor and the legislature felt the pressure to veto those maps. So when you saw the headline that said, Louisiana governor vetoes congressional map, but please know that there were hundreds of hours that from the civil rights community, from the racial justice community, again, led by Power Coalition, that went into that moment, into getting that veto.
No, absolutely. And, I'm guilty of doing that a lot. I don't know, maybe part of it is that y'all, it's just so much, right? Like there's so many pieces. It's so tenuous all the time in these processes, but, but that's what's beautiful about, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank, the faith community that really stepped up and really showed the power that they had in their congregations, our partners, Norris and a few others made some very powerful key phone calls. And these are the things that are necessary to, one, show that we actually are and continue to build power, and that there is a shift. There's a shift that's happening, and it's a shift toward people and not toward, business and, politics as usual. And so, for that, we are super grateful, to be in a position to be able to continue to apply pressure, to make those phone calls, to be able to make mini grants, to be able to do all of those things so that we can support people and having their voices heard in this process. But I mean, one of the things that, I'm still sitting with it, the fact that that we were able to, to get the governor to veto this congressional map, because when you look at power in this state, the ability to have a second congressional majority minority district is huge. And if you don't believe me, I tell folks all the time, I mean, it's the difference between Lake Charles getting aid or not. It's the difference between an infrastructure bill that's providing billions of dollars flowing through states throughout this country that only one congressman in our delegation voted for. And we know that these votes are coming down to a handful of votes. And the idea that, we had an entire delegation, with the exception of Congressman Troy Carter, that voted against an infrastructure bill, but because of politics, but we needed those resources to rebuild our communities, is insane. And so it speaks to how powerful having an additional voice can be for Louisiana, and how also we can have another person and our persons, depending on how the midterms go, that are fighting for the issues that matter to our communities and not playing politics when it's our literal lives. And I think that's the shift that we have to keep pushing for, is that, if you've heard me speak, you've heard me say it all the time, everything I love is in this place. And when I'm on the ground in community, I don't ever feel like I'm so different from the people that I engage with, whether I'm in Shreveport, Monroe, Alexandria, Ville Platte, St. Bernard Parish, wherever I am in the state. I don't ever feel that different. But where I do feel a striking difference is when I'm at the Capitol. And so there's not a big difference between the people of this state and where our core values are. And we're not going to agree on everything. But I mean, I think, there are a lot of things that we are more alike than we are different. But when I go to the Capitol, there is a huge chasm between what our state and the people of our state need and what they're willing to do. And so we've got to keep pushing and building voice. And so, and so with that, again, we are so grateful for all of you for helping us, continue to push the envelope, move the needle on the things that are really important to people in our community. I'd be remiss if I didn't also lift up my team. I spent a part of last year out with, out battling cancer. I am healthy and fine. And my team really stood up, and they really held this work and held the institution and moved it forward in my absence. For that, I am forever grateful. I think that it it goes without saying that, we do a lot of work at the Power Coalition, but we are a really small team. And I am so grateful, that at the end of the day, this small team, we might be small, but we are mighty. And we're also hiring. So go check out our website for some of those positions. But I'm grateful. And there are not enough words to capture what it means to be able to work with folks that truly have your back, and then also passionately believe in the work that we are trying to move in the ways in which we're trying to change this state. And so for that, I'm grateful. And I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge them. I also want to acknowledge all of our canvassers. I also love their passion. They are in the streets, on the doors, talking to communities about all of the different things in the intersections of these issues. And we are so grateful to them and all the ways that they show up for us. When it's time to get stuff done and you need an army, then our canvassers, they show up and they're an army. And so I think that as we think about all the things that are happening this year, we encourage you to get involved. And then in closing, we have an election on this coming Saturday. There are a lot of different places across the state that have things on the ballot, whether it's a representative seat that is open, like we have here in Baton Rouge, because Representative Ted James has moved to the SBA, or, several judicial races that are also on the ballot. And so I just ask everyone to make sure to check your ballot, and to make sure that if you do have an opportunity to vote, that you make sure that that your vote and your voice are heard during this election. And then in the fall, Jared's heard me say this a couple of times, but I keep telling folks, well, since, they wanted to neuter the voices of, the more than 42% of the state, which, the census admitted that they undercounted all of the major metros. And so I said, I'm just going with 45%, because that feels like that's probably more accurate when I'm on the ground in community. But since they did that when we go to these elections in the fall for the midterms and for one of our U.S. congressional Senate seats, that we make sure that they feel the full force of that 45%. And whatever it is that is important to you and that matters to you, I want to make sure that they feel our voices, that they feel that we may not be able to elect a candidate of choice, but 45% plus a couple of other votes and some allies, I think certainly gets us to a place where we can send a really strong, powerful message. And so for that, we're grateful. I thank you all for your time. I thank you all for joining us. Jared, Norris, Rashetta, thank you so much and Susanna, thank you so much for sharing this space with us today. Again, also super grateful to all of you for all of your support. And I also want to make the distinction. I shouted out SPLC and some other groups, but I want to also shout out NAACP, Louisiana NAACP as well. But thank you all for all that you do and all of the partnerships and all of the support, because we are changing this state. And I'm grateful to all of you for the ability to be able to do that. And we're going to keep on fighting, and we're going to keep on showing folks doing the impossible. And so, but we can't do that without you. And so thank you. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. And we'll make sure all of these slides are available to you, as well as the annual report, again, on our website, powercoalition.org. And then we'll also make sure that there are links to all of our partners on our website as well. So you can find me or Norris or any of our partners on our website as well. And look forward to more conversations. So thank you.
Thank you, Ashley, and everyone at Power Coalition for all that y'all do.
No, thank you guys. Look, we can't do it without you. And like I said, thank you, Norris. All the, I just keep thinking about during the disaster, you just jumped into action and made it so easy for us to follow suit and, and think about the ways in which we could get money to the ground the quickest. And, and Rashetta too, for just doing what we know, folks do in their community every day without any support. And Power Coalition was just glad to be there to be a support. And so with that,
thanks so much for that. Thank you.
And so thank you guys. Y'all have a good day, and I'm gonna let y'all go.